Unfortunately, the real minimum wage is always zero, regardless of the laws, and that is the wage that many workers receive in the wake of the creation or escalation of a government-mandated minimum wage because they lose their jobs or fail to find jobs when they enter the labor force. Making it illegal to pay less than a given amount does not make a worker's productivity worth that amount, and if it is not, that worker is unlikely to be employed.
All right. Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive.
Yeah, glad to be back.
Today, we're going to be looking at the effects of minimum wage increases.
Oh, yeah.
Which is something that, it's always in the news.
Always.
There's always some debate going on about it.
Sure.
And to help us kind of unpack this a little bit, we've got some research here from Georgetown University,
Okay.
North Carolina State University, and the University of Washington.
Great sources.
And then also, we'll be looking at some ideas from economist Thomas Sowell.
Interesting.
So one of the things that really kind of jumped out at me
Yeah.
when I was looking at this research was this idea that raising the minimum wage could actually lead to businesses hiring more workers, but giving them fewer hours each week.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Which seems a little counterintuitive.
Yeah, you'd think if they're paying their workers more, they'd hire fewer people.
Right, exactly.
But what this research shows is that instead of doing that, they might spread the work out amongst more employees, but then each employee gets scheduled for fewer hours.
So it's like they're kind of like spreading the butter more thinly
Exactly.
across the loaf of bread.
Yeah, that's a great analogy.
So how does that then affect the workers?
Right.
Is that ultimately a good thing for them or a bad thing?
Well, that's where it gets complicated.
Okay.
I mean, having more people employed is generally a good thing.
Yeah.
But if those workers are getting fewer hours, then obviously they're earning less overall.
Makes sense.
And they also might not qualify for, things like health insurance or paid time off, which are really important benefits.
Yeah, and it seems like, if you're only working a few hours a week,
Yeah.
it'd be harder to kind of make ends meet and have that be your only job.
Exactly. It's tough.
Yeah.
And it's not just the number of hours that can be affected.
Okay.
This research also found that minimum wage increases can lead to less predictable schedules for workers.
Oh, so what does that look like practically?
Like, imagine you're a single parent,
Yeah.
right? And you rely on a set number of hours every week
Yeah.
to be able to afford childcare.
Uh-huh.
So you plan your whole life, getting the kids to school, picking them up around that schedule.
Right.
But then all of a sudden your hours get cut without much notice, and you're in trouble.
Yeah.
It's hard to budget. It's hard to find childcare.
Yeah, it throws your whole life into chaos.
Totally. Exactly.
Yeah, that's a really good example.
Right.
Yeah.
It kind of brings it home, like how these things can really have a big impact.
Uh-huh. And we have to think about the big picture.
For sure.
And not just kind of like the dollar amount.
Exactly.
Which brings us to Thomas Sowell.
Oh, yeah.
So he famously argued that the real minimum wage is always zero.
Right.
So what did he mean by that?
Well, his point was that, just raising the minimum wage doesn't mean that everybody's guaranteed a job.
Yeah.
Oh.
So if the business owner doesn't feel that an employee's skills or productivity are worth the new higher wage, they might just let that employee go.
Right.
And if you lose your job,
Yeah.
you're effectively making $0 an hour.
So even though the intention behind raising the minimum wage is good,
Yeah.
the reality of how it plays out can be really complicated.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's why it's so important to consider the trade-offs.
Uh-huh.
I mean, it might help some workers, but it could also lead to fewer hours, less predictable schedules,
Right.
and even job losses for other workers.
So there's not like a clear, easy answer.
No, not at all. There's no magic solution. But what we can do is learn from these studies and think about all these different perspectives.
Yeah.
I mean, we have to remember that these decisions affect real people's lives.
Absolutely.
And we have to think carefully about all the potential consequences.
Both good and bad.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's a lot to consider.
So, to kind of wrap things up,
Okay.
what are some of the key takeaways from our deep dive today?
Well, I think the biggest one is that the effects of minimum wage increases are a lot more complicated than they might seem.
Right.
There's a lot more to it than just the dollar amount.
Absolutely. Well said.
Thanks.
And for our listeners out there, a final question to ponder.
Oh, yeah.
What other factors do you think might influence the impact of minimum wage increases in different industries or regions?
That's a great question.
Yeah?
It really makes you think.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for joining us for another deep dive.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And we'll catch you next time.
See you later.